The New York Mets have announced that Old Timers Day is returning this August. We will see some Mets legends head out to Citi Field to play a ball game. It's going to be a lot of fun. It was great today to see Cliff Floyd, Daniel Murphy, and Robin Ventura talk about the Old Timers Day, and I'm going to go through all of it on today's episode of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans who are watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing about the Mets at justbaseball.com. So the Mets have announced that they are going to bring back Old Timers Day, which was last played in 1994. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the press conference today because I really did enjoy watching that with Robin Ventura and Cliff Floyd and Daniel Murphy. But first, I just want to reiterate once again how great Steve Cohen is for this franchise. It's not just about, signing a Max Scherzer, giving Francisco Lindor $341 million. All of that stuff is amazing. And the on-field product is supposed to get better. I believe it will. That is the primary objective. That is what Steve Cohen has to focus on. But with all that said, what is great is it feels like finally there's someone atop the organization that is willing to embrace the history of the New York Mets and just embrace the Mets as a brand that fans and everyone should be proud of. That the blue and orange color is not a second-rate, sign of the other team in New York, that the New York Mets are a franchise that should be celebrated. Sure, they don't have 27 World Series, right? The Mets have only won 2, but they still have had players that have made an impact on fans for decades now, and suddenly we are starting to see this embrace of Mets history, and that's awesome to see. Jerseys getting retired with Keith Hernandez now being the next one up after Kuzman, to see a statue soon to be erected for Tom Seaver, to see so many other Mets getting into the Hall of Fame, Ron Darling getting inducted this past year. It's finally a point where the Mets are looking back at their history and they're not embarrassed by it. It always felt with the Wilpons like, there was such a high bar, right? The only way that you're going to get your jersey retired is if you're a Hall of Famer with the Mets cap, and Tom Seaver and Mike Piazza. They never did go out of their way to even, honor someone like Tom Seaver, who should have been such a key figure of the Mets in that new ballpark to build Citi Field. And the Robinson Rotunda is great. It's a beautiful entrance to the ballpark. It's great to honor Jackie Robinson and what he meant to baseball, but there was more Dodgers history in that ballpark than Mets history. Why wasn't there a Seaver statue just waiting? I mean, what was different in 2009 than in 2022 when it comes to Tom Seaver? So there was so many different instances where it felt like the Wilpons, for whatever reason, were ashamed of the Mets history and didn't embrace what history that they had. And an Old Timers Day is great to bring back because fans appreciate this stuff. Fans are going to go out to the ballpark on, was it August 27th, prior to the game against the Rockies, and they're going to get to see all of these former players that they love get on the field and, play a ball game. And there's going to be funny moments that are going to, leak out onto social media, and that's going to create even more buzz. And all of this is not only great for Mets fans and great for the franchise, just to build excitement, but it's also great for the business of the New York Mets. And Steve Cohen, while a fan, while someone who I think is doing all these things and motivated entirely by creating a fan experience that he would appreciate as a fan, all of that still is moving in a positive direction when it comes to the business of the Mets and making the Mets a more profitable team, making the Mets a more fan centric organization where, again, you can be proud to wear those blue and orange colors. So I think that this is great. This was rumored for some time the Mets would do this. They would bring Old Timers Day back. Steve Cohen has referenced this many times when he's spoken with the media. I believe he said something about an Old Timers Day in his introductory press conference over a year ago now. So all of this is not surprising, but it is good to see. And it was great to see some friendly faces on a Zoom call today, as you saw Cliff Floyd, Daniel Murphy, and Robin Ventura. Just ironically, three of my favorite players of all time. And that's what I want to talk about in a minute here. How this is going to be a great celebration of Mets history, and particularly for me to see those three faces on the call, it really did bring that point home even further for me personally, because again, these were three of my favorites. This is the time of year where in the past I might have given up on my New Year's resolutions to eat healthier and stay in shape. But this year, it's so much easier to stick to my resolution because I have Built Bars as a key part of my diet. These are protein bars that taste like candy bars. It doesn't even make it hard to stick to my resolution because I actually enjoy eating them. These are protein bars that come low in calories, they're high in protein. They can replace any candy bar. Taste just as good, but they're so much better for you. And there's also so many flavors you can choose from, whether that's the mint brownie bar, coconut almond. New this month, you have the white chocolate cookies and cream. I love the original cookies and cream, but I just got the white chocolate one. I don't know. It's given the original a run for its money. It is a delicious flavor of Built Bar. Any new flavor you want to try will be available at built.com. If you think there's a flavor that might be good, trust me, they make it. It will be delicious and good for you. And if you go to built.com right now, you can use the promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCK15, 15% off at built.com. All right, so I want to talk a bit about the Zoom call that we watched today with Daniel Murphy, Robin Ventura, and Cliff Floyd. And I'm usually not a big fan of the Zoom press conference. We've had some throughout the offseason with Billy Epler and Buck Showalter, and there was those few player introduction press conferences where you had Mark Canha, Eduardo Escobar, and Starling Marte on a call, and then Max Scherzer and Scott Boras on a call. Generally, though, I mean, the precedents get kind of long and dragged out, and I don't always enjoy questioning in that outlet. It's not always the most entertaining of mediums, but I gotta say, I was eating up every single minute of this presser today about Old Timers Day because these were three of my guys. Like each generation of my fandom, these were the players that weren't the best on the team that I loved the most as a kid growing up. So Robin Ventura, I think I've told this, I definitely have told this story on the podcast before. So for longtime listeners, I apologize. But one of my most vivid early memories is when Robin Ventura got traded. He was one of my favorite players. It was basically Piazza and Ventura. I was born in 95. So I grew up, I mean, right when I came to, my consciousness as a Mets fan, it was those teams, the late 90s, early 2000s with Ventura and Piazza. And Ventura was my guy. So when Ventura got traded, I remember my dad might have read it in a newspaper. Isn't that crazy? No Twitter back then. And my dad tells me about it. Hey, and he might have tried to talk about, the positives of the trade for whatever they were. But the idea that Ventura was traded to the Yankees, I was heartbroken and was bawling my eyes out for the rest of that afternoon. I mean, to lose my favorite player like that, yeah, it was rough. And so to see him again and to get to see him in Old Timers Day, it's great because it is honoring his legacy as a great Met. Did he have the type of career that warrants induction into the Mets Hall of Fame? I don't think so, but he did have some really good years. And the same thing can be said about Cliff Floyd, which kind of followed along those same lines. Cliff Floyd, I grew up in South Florida and went to a lot of these camps. The Bucky Dent camp was one that we went to, pretty much every summer. And Cliff Floyd, when he was with the Marlins, was going to the camp as an instructor at times. So as a kid growing up, Cliff Floyd was this incredible personality. Him and Kevin Millar were kind of the two Marlins that I would see when I was, a young baseball player at these camps, or when I would go to a fan fest, that would always, be just so generous with their time, so nice to a young kid. I have pictures of me, with Millar and Floyd when I was younger. And so I always loved those two in particular during their time with the Marlins. And then Floyd becomes a Met, and that just took him to a whole other stratosphere. Here's a guy that, I sat on his lap, and now he's playing for my favorite team, and hitting a bunch of bombs, and we had 34 home runs, and was it 05? Regardless, he had some really good years with the Mets where he was just a solid player, a huge part in David Wright, coming of age on the Mets roster. He was Wright's leader in those early years. So it was awesome to see him talk. He's such a charismatic guy. That's why he does great on TV. And so it was great to see Cliff Floyd in that press conference. And again, just connecting other eras of Mets baseball. Cliff Floyd, not a Mets Hall of Famer, but a guy that had some really good years with the Mets. And that's what's beautiful about Old Timers Day. Now that it's going to become an annual tradition, you can bring other guys, in and out. You can honor some who had, great moments with the Mets. So I really do think that is just a great thing that this franchise is doing moving forward. And then lastly, you have Daniel Murphy, and Murph just retired prior to the last season. And Daniel Murphy, another player that has kind of a special place in my heart, because he was the first thing that got me into this industry of writing or talking about sports. In 2015, down the stretch, I, to once again toot my own horn a bit. At 19 at the time, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. But what I did want to do is I wanted to write an article about Daniel Murphy and why the Mets should sign him the next offseason. This was in early September of 2015, where I said the Mets should sign this guy, but not the guy you're thinking about. And that was in reference to Daniel Murphy, and as opposed to signing Yoenis Cespedes. This is an article I wrote for Metsmerize. It was a fan shot. I sent it in. They put it up on the site, got a lot of buzz, brought me on as a writer. I changed my major to journalism, and away we go for the next, 7 years, as I've just been covering all kinds of sports, but particularly baseball. And Murphy was the first article I ever wrote that got published. Holds up extremely well, considering the numbers he put up in Washington. And then, of course, before that, that incredible playoff run that he went on. I still think it was a massive mistake that the Mets did not bring Murphy back after that season. At the time, if you read the article, I reference how David Wright had all the health concerns, how, Lucas Duda would be a free agent at some point. It was more of a streaky hitter. And I said, hey, sign Murphy because he could play first, third, second for you, and he's a great hitter. And they did not do it. He went on to finish runner up in the MVP, I think, in 2016 with the Nationals. And just a guy that, if he had stayed with the Mets, he would be, in the top 10 in some categories like doubles and others. He could have finished with some really compelling numbers as far as his Mets career that would have been worthy of induction into the Mets Hall of Fame. I don't know if he will ever get there, but I personally, as a fan, would induct Daniel Murphy into the Mets Hall of Fame. It's not like his jersey should ever be retired, but he had a really good early career with the Mets. And, you can talk about great postseason performances. It's going to be hard for anyone to top what Daniel Murphy did. And this is a franchise that hasn't been to the World Series often. And Daniel Murphy was really the key figure in getting him there in 2015. So it's going to be great to see him come back, get another opportunity to be adored by Mets fans, to once again kind of be ushered back into this franchise. Because I think as Daniel Murphy goes on with his post-playing career, the Mets are the franchise he will continue to be identified with. It's not going to be the Nationals. It's certainly not going to be the Rockies. It'll be the Mets, and it was great to see him in this capacity. It'll be awesome to see him play in Old Timers Day. But before we close today, what I want to do is go through the list of other players that have been announced, and also talk about a few who maybe we could see get announced prior to this Old Timers Day in August. They said they'll be rolling out players in the coming days, weeks, and months leading up to the event. So we'll go through that in just a minute. There might be less football being played, but betonline.net has way more stuff to bet on this playoff season. From scores, totals, player performance props, to where the next fire coach is going to land, BetOnline is the number one spot for all things NFL betting in 2022. And it's not just football. BetOnline.net's basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC odds coverage is the best in the business. From sports right down to your favorite Vegas casino games, BetOnline is your number one online wagering destination. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports. Bet online, where the game starts. All right, so let's go through this list of players that have been announced so far. You have Frank Thomas, Ron Swoboda, John Matlack, Felix Millan, Mookie Wilson, Howard Johnson, Bobby Ojeda, Robin Ventura, Turk Wendell, Andy Chavez, Cliff Floyd, and Daniel Murphy. So all of them having their various moments with the team. You have some 86 Mets in there. You got some Mets from the early days with Thomas, Swoboda, and Matlack. And, overall, I just think that this is going to be such a great event. They said at this point that is just the first of many announcements when it comes to the players that will be participating. There'll be over 40 players scheduled to attend. And we could see some other big names. I don't know if you'll see David Wright at this event. That'd be obviously big news in of itself to just get David Wright. Carlos Beltran be another one that'd be kind of interesting to welcome him back after the managerial snafu and everything that happened there. Maybe this would be a way to once again have him back in the fold. I think he did take a position with the Yankees. I think he's in someone's front office again. Um, Not that that would necessarily prohibit him from playing an old timers game, but that's another big name that comes to mind. Jose Reyes, another one that you could see. I mean, that's certainly a name that will divide a lot, but there's still a big segment of Mets fans that would want to see Jose on a baseball field again in a Mets uniform. There were certainly still cheers for him despite everything that happened in his final couple of years with the Mets when he returned. So that would be another one you could potentially see. I would imagine that in some capacity, whether actually playing or just being on the field, like you'll see a Ron Darling and a Keith Hernandez be part of this in some way. Like it'd be cool to see an Eric Campbell or a Ty Kelly or a Mike Baxter, right? Some of these other guys who are probably still in their 30s, right? Come out and maybe you need some fresh, young blood out there to kind of help the game move along a little bit. So that would be pretty cool. Al Leiter, that's a name that you could maybe see at an old timers day. John Franco. There's a lot of great Mets who could return. And I think what's great about it, again, it's a way to honor legacies and a simpler way, a way that you can honor a player without having to exalt them into a Hall of Fame or have a number retired or a statue or a street named after someone. This is a way that you can acknowledge, hey, you had great memories with the Mets. You can bring Ike Davis back. Why not, right? He had some good moments with the Mets. Bring back Carlos Delgado would be fun. There's a lot of former Mets I think we'd like to see back in this capacity. Paul LaDuca, how about him? Again, it's honoring guys that had big moments as well. Andy Chavez might not have numbers that will just blow you away, but he has the most memorable catch, likely, in Mets history. And it's just unfortunate that did not result in a win. But all of this is going to be fun. I'm sure we'll get some great content out of Turk Wendell in some way, shape, or form. That guy is he was before his time. Just the eccentric personality that I think if he had played today, he would be one of those players that would be more prominent than even the results that he would be putting up on the mound just because of the story and the folklore that comes with him. It'll be good to see him back with the snake tooth necklace and eating the licorice before the game and all the superstitions. It'll be interesting to see if he carries those over. I'm sure it'll be good to see him on the mound. The one thing I'm a little concerned about when it comes to old timers day, you just want to make sure everyone is safe and comes out of it unhurt. Daniel Murphy was being very modest about what he can do on a baseball field still. He's been golfing a lot more than he's been playing ball. He's a year removed now from the game. got to imagine he can still hit some screaming line drives. And if Ron Swoboda is on the field, that makes me concerned. But then again, those guys sometimes will just take some BP before the game and show their face and get introduced, but not necessarily play. And certainly, if you have some guys like Murphy, Cliff Lloyd, even Rob Ventura, who are still young enough to be able to do some damage out there, that's got to be a bit concerning. But the bottom line through all of this is, again, we're in the middle of a lockout. There's not a ton to talk about currently as far as news, and I think the Mets have just done an amazing job of giving us stuff during this lockout. You're having Buck Showalter and Billy Epler meet with the media a couple times to talk about the state of affairs and give you something to grasp onto, to be able now to announce the Old Timers Day, to announce Keith Hernandez getting his jersey retired. I mean, if you're a Twins fan right now, it's probably been dead silent for the past 3 months, where you've had nothing to talk about since the end of the season. Whereas the Mets, had a really quick and fast-paced offseason where they jumped out and they made a lot of big moves that got fans excited. And during this lockout period, they have focused on Mets history in a way that also can keep fans engaged. And that's what Steve Cohen has done a great job with. That's why I think this franchise is just moving in such a great direction, because he is fostering a whole new generation of Mets fans. And this is a fan base that's only going to grow stronger and stronger as Cohen continues to run this team this way, doing things like this, bringing back Old Timers Day, bringing back the black jerseys last year. Listen to your fans. That's what he's done on Twitter, and acknowledge what they want and give it to them. It's not that difficult. Yet the Wilpons did what they did over the past couple decades prior, that again, just wasn't building the Mets up in the right way, as Cohen now is. Regardless, so that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. Tomorrow, we're going to keep it with Mets history, a throwback podcast for a Throwback Thursday. I will be discussing the biggest draft busts in franchise history. Then we'll close out the week with some prospect talk. Anyway, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. Thank you, as always, for listening. You can follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. You can follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now, for your second listen, check out Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling. Get blowout specialist daily picks, wrong team favorite picks, and Lee Sterling's lock of the day by following Locked On Bets wherever you get podcasts.